Hello and welcome to another edition of the These Football Times vlog. And we are currently, well, we're about to be halfway through our 3-cup final trilogy. So having done the 1987 FA Cup final and with the impending UEFA Club competition finals, we are following suit. And tonight we are looking at a classic UEFA Cup final, which has been chosen by Mr. Stephen Scragg this time. Stephen, you all right?
We're well, Stu. How's everything your end?
Yeah, not too bad. And what we're trying to say here, a biased choice, or was it just because that's how it is?
Partially biased, partially not biased. I think, I was going to go in a different direction. I was actually going to go with 84.
Okay.
But then given that we threw Tottenham into the 87 FA Cup final, that kind of clinched it. And then I was looking at Ipswich, and then I thought, well, it's the first leg that is the more interesting from the Ipswich perspective than the second leg. And then I thought, well, how about I go for one of the one-off finals? And then I thought, as soon as I thought of going off for a one-off final, then there was only one choice really, because no matter take my team out of the equation, it's the maddest, maddest final of the colour television generation, I think.
Oh, that's quite a build-up you've just given it. Excellent. Gary, looking forward to this one?
Yeah, I am, and I'm well chuffed that Stephen didn't pick a boring 0-0 draw. It's a game.
That would have been the option, is to go for one of those classic Serie A stalemates of the early 1990s.
Where will we do the Champions League one? The AC Milan Juve when that gets picked.
No, you picked a great game, Stevie. Plenty of action, plenty of goals, controversy, plenty to talk about. So good pick, buddy.
Excellent. And Aidan, again, obviously, you and I can't really relate to many cup final victories, so we just sort of sit and listen in awe and drop little bits in every now and then. We don't really know what it's like. Looking forward to this one?
Oh, very much so. Yes, exactly. We can live these things through everyone else. It's easier this way, isn't it? It's less tense.
Yeah, who needs that in their life?
Because if I had a vested interest in this game, I'd have probably had several aneurysms, heart attack, and who knows what else. So yeah, much better from the sidelines.
Excellent. Before we start, did you go to this one, Stephen?
No, I didn't get to this. This was a bridge too far for me. Okay. I was off on holiday a few days later. I'd done all the trips to Cardiff. We'd been for the Birmingham game, been for the FA Cup final against Arsenal. Just renewed my season ticket, gone to all the aways. So it was just a bridge too far for me on this one. But it was one of those that I didn't come out to the ballot with a ticket for it. So if I did, then I'd have gone for it. But yeah, it wasn't my turn of the card on this one, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're gonna spend the next sort of 45, 50 minutes then reviewing, and there's a lot to review in 45, 50 minutes. The 2001 UEFA Cup final between Liverpool and Alavés. Obviously, before we get into the action, Stephen, we've obviously decided you can be pitch side this evening for this one, talking us through the action. As good a job as Aidan did back in 1987. We're going to give you this one. But before we get sort of into the action and into the sort of first half, just a little bit of background from the three of you. By all means, start us off, Stephen, with sort of Liverpool's route to this final.
Yeah, Liverpool had come at it from a kind of standing start almost. From the return of European football after Hazel for Liverpool. There'd only been one substantial run, 1.5 substantial runs. There was a run to the quarterfinals of the UEFA Cup in 91-92, where Liverpool shot themselves in the foot twice against Genoa. And there was a run to the semi-finals of the Cup Winners' Cup in 97, where they lost the first leg away in Paris against PSG 3-0. Spirited come back in the second leg, but just fell short at 2-0. But yeah, in the seasons in between that run to the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup and going all the way in the UEFA Cup in 2001, a huge amount of change had gone. Roy Evans had undertaken this co-partnership of the management, very short-lived, with Gerard Houllier, and then Houllier took over. But there was Liverpool were an absolute basket case of a squad and a club. Going into the summer of 1999, and that's where it kind of changed. 99-2000, Liverpool hadn't even qualified for Europe, so they had a dry run domestically. And then there was great improvements, but they missed out on a Champions League place on the final day away at Bradford. Leeds took the place. Bradford got the win that kept them in the Premier League for a second season. And Liverpool went into the UEFA Cup. But it was a good learning curve. It did stand Liverpool in good stead, to go the following season and go all the way. But within that, it was 2 seasons since he played in Europe. There'd been a run to the third round of the UEFA Cup in 98-99, where they fell to, I think it was Celta Vigo. There had been explosive games against Hex Cooper's Valencia. So it was an action-packed but short-lived run. But Liverpool were very wet behind the ears. 2000, 2001, they still had everything to prove. But Gerard Houllier, it was huge to Gerard Houllier to do well in Europe. And he set Liverpool up to defend deeply away from home and go for it on big nights at Anfield. That just turned the clock back. This was where Liverpool reawoke as a club on European nights. And there was it was a run that took them past Rapid Bucharest, Slovan Liberec, Olympiacos. This is before Gerrard has that night against them a few years later in the Champions League. There was Roma, incredible win in Roma actually, in Rome, and then a narrow loss at home and a mad night where the referee seemed to give them a penalty at 1-0, which would have levelled the scores in aggregate, but then changed his mind and gave a corner. Because we were arguing, and I was at this game, and the argument was, well, no, he's not giving a penalty, he's giving a goal kick. So from a certain direction, it looked like you're giving a goal kick. Yet the next thing is, their own players are given a corner. And then there's a big, huge row, and then Liverpool just hang on. And then it was like Porto was another one. And then it was Barcelona, and this is Barcelona with Guardiola in the Patrick Kluivert. Liverpool defended, epically, like a non-league team away to a top-flight team in an FA Cup game. Liverpool hardly ventured out of their own half, only to run after balls and channels and stuff like that. Got a goal of straw over it at the Camp Nou, and then won it 1-0 with a penalty. I think it was just before half time. Pepe Reina was in goal for Barcelona that night. The strange image of Pepe Reina with her, and I was right in the middle of the Cop that night. Swapped my ticket from the scenery for a superstitious friend who'd watched the entire run from elsewhere in the ground all the way through, and his ticket was for the Cop. And everyone he asked either had a ticket for the Cop or they were unwilling to swap because they'd been in their seats all the way through the run. But yeah, just about half an hour before kick-off, I said, yeah, no problem, I'll swap with you. And it was right in the middle of the Cop, and it bounced. It literally bounced. Most epic, one of the most underrated nights, or forgotten, because of all these nights that have come along since. It's still for me one of the greatest nights because it was just Liverpool kind of like turning back the clock, and it was just a absolutely spectacular night. And then this propelled us into this final. 4 days beyond the FA Cup final against Arsenal, which was a debilitating final. Even though it was finished in 90 minutes, it was a red hot day in Cardiff that day. Sweltering day, and I was there in a retro cotton Liverpool shirt, heavy shirt, shades of the 71 final, I think there, and yeah, it was an incredible final, but it took a toll. So Liverpool going into the Wednesday night against Alavés was always going to be an interesting one.
It's funny, obviously, talking about Alavés there, and Gary, I guess, when you think of some of the great Spanish sides, certainly with European tradition and heritage, and certainly Alavés were not in that bracket.
No, I think, with Liverpool, their European success traditions, you couldn't pick a more contrasting club than Alavés. The Alavés come from Hola in the Basque Country, but the Basque Country is footballly dominated by the two major clubs, which are Real Sociedad and Athletic in Bilbao. And to many, on currently, Alavés would probably be the fifth best Basque team behind Little Eibar and perhaps Osasuna, although it's arguable whether Osasuna are a Basque club, although Osasuna is a Basque word. But going back to the time of this game, they were on a bit of a meteoric rise. They'd come through the Segunda, and before that, been in Segunda A and Segunda B, which are all regionalised. And to get out of those leagues to progress is massively complicated. You have to win playoff games, not just win the league, get promoted. No. That just gets you into the competition to try and get promoted. So for Alavés to come through that sort of competition, that come from the fourth tier, I think, in about 10 years, up to finishing sixth, which got them into this competition. And they've got some decent players playing. They've got Yuri Cruyff playing for them, and Cosmin Contra, the Romanian defender. So they've got some decent players playing for them, but they've built their success on a sort of parsimonious approach to the game. So the Spanish league, La Liga season those days, well, I think it's still true, comprises 38 games. And across those 38 games, they've scored 41 goals and conceded 37. So there's an awful lot of 1-0s in that triumph that they got into sixth place. Although sixth place on that sort of less than spectacular performance, still only putting 3 points behind Barcelona for the second. So the pedigree in that sort of stage was, they were pretty much a club on the up. But with that sort of 41 goals in 38 games, you weren't expecting the goal that you got in this game, that's for sure.
It's funny, I mean, Aidan, the UEFA Cup, I mean, obviously I'm not trying to plug your book here, Stephen, but clearly there's a book coming out soon by somebody about the UEFA Cup. But the UEFA Cup for me is not a strange competition, but it's a competition that seems to have gone through its sort of peaks and troughs in terms of prestige. Certainly for me growing up, the UEFA Cup was a great competition. Really always a cluster of really, really good sides were always in it, always an incredibly difficult competition to win. Now, it's incredibly difficult because it's just a marathon. It is epic to win the Europa League. But sort of around this time, it was almost in not a bit of a no man's land, but it sort of struggled to sort of find its place for me at this time, this competition.
Yeah, definitely. And they changed from the two-legged finals only a few years before the one we're talking about in the sort of late 90s. But yeah, you're right. It was in a strange position because it was, again, around the time of the two-legged finals reverted to one, was when the Champions League was starting to take runners up. And then after that, third place teams, and then later still fourth place teams. I mean, I recall from my own team that Newcastle were qualified as runners-up on a couple of occasions into the Champions League in the early days of that. So, yeah, it was a competition that was starting to diminish, I guess, in some cases from its rather more glorious past, because over the years, you always had several qualifiers to the UEFA Cup. I mean, people are a more recent vintage than ourselves might not appreciate that, obviously, with the European Cup and Cup Winners' Cup only having the one team in each, the rest, and it was 2 or 3 or even 4 teams from the bigger countries in the UEFA Cup. That made it a much longer competition, but it made it have a huge amount of strength and depth. So you envisage a situation where, say, Barcelona have won the Spanish league, and there's Real Madrid, and there's Atletico or Valencia and so on qualifying in. Similarly in Italy, maybe Milan have won the league, but you've got Napoli, you've got Inter, you've got Juventus, and they all, bar one who may have won the cup, they all end up in the UEFA Cup. So as much as it was a lengthy competition because of the extra teams in it, it was high quality. To win through the European Cup, the Champions Cup, you could get through to the latter stages by not really having to play that many big teams, because you're playing the winners of leagues that are less strong in some cases. But the UEFA Cup, you had to come through a lot of rounds of very, very strong opposition to reach these latter stages. Now that was, as we say, changed slightly by the time of this game we're talking about today, but still not drastically so at this point. We hadn't quite reached the massive saturation of Champions League that we have now. So it was still a very strong competition. Oddly enough, we're talking about the Alavés and where they'd come from. It's not a competition that the Spanish clubs had done particularly well in. We think of it in recent years and the Europa League years that Spanish clubs have dominated hugely. Sevilla won it a few years in a row. There's been various others as well. Whereas at this point, it had only been Real Madrid, a couple of wins, I think, in the 80s, and that was it for Spain. Whereas England had quite a strong history in this competition, especially in its early days. And no, since it's me talking about it, I may as well throw it in here. The Fairs Cup, the predecessor, had a few English winners as well. Sure, we can guess who one of them was. But anyway, it was a terrific competition, and I'm sure Stephen's book will go into quite a lot of depth about the sort of glory years of it, of the extra strength and depth that this competition had over the others, even if it wasn't the champions. And this was on the tail end of that still. So, Liverpool had to come through a lot of big teams to get there, as we've mentioned. And Alavés have obviously, they had some good wins too. They actually thrashed Kaiserslautern in the semi-final over 2 legs, 9-2. So as much as they kept their powder dry in the Spanish league, they were scoring a bit in Europe and won their way through. So yeah, they had pedigree, but Liverpool surely had greater pedigree. But it's a great final, of course, at the time where the tournament is changing. It was only a few years down the line, it became the Europa League, and it changed again when you get the dropouts from the Champions League group stage, and that has diminished it somewhat, in my eyes anyway. That it can stand, or it stood perfectly well as a competition in its own right for a long, long time. I appreciate things have changed with the way there's more teams into the top division in the top competition, Champions League, but it really was a strong competition and no exception in this season, even if one of the finalists may not appear so at first glance.
It's well done, guys. That's excellent. You've set us up a treat for this. So, Stephen, you can talk us through the action. We'll give you the first flag that there's an awful lot of action. But, if you want to sort of summarise the first half for us, if you can.
Oh, I'll certainly try. It's kind of like an Empire Strikes Back
It
form of football.
Yeah, absolutely.
2001 UEFA Cup final. There's something going on at every moment of that game, and it was absolutely ridiculous how much happened in it, the way that it unfolded, and it was just relentless. From Marcus Babbel opening the scoring after just 3 minutes. And he'd had a wonderful season, predominantly playing at right back. He'd been brought in as a centre, and Jamie Carragher spoke about it, that interview we did with him, and said how Babbel had come in predominantly to be a centre back to play alongside Stefan Honcho, who'd come in from Blackburn, but then Liverpool didn't realise just how good Sami Hyypiä was, and he hit the floor running. He made himself undroppable. Then when Hencho was fit to play, that meant that Babbel shifted to right back instead, which messed Jamie Carragher's season up, as he ended up playing his one and only season basically as the regular left back. Probably the toughest season that he had in his career, because Liverpool fans, it was still an era where Liverpool fans were relatively unforgiving. There was always an aspect of local players would have to do so much better than players brought in from different areas. So much was expected of them, and this was a remnant of that. So while Fowler and McManaman and Gerrard had all come along and they were seen as the great scout hopes, a player like Carragher came in, seen to be workmanlike. He was part of that era, or a leftover of that era, that the demands were that he played at like 200%, when everyone else got away with 110. But yeah, Babbel was absolutely electric down the right hand side that season. As a defender, the most attacking kind of career defender. You have attacking fullbacks, but for a centre back, right back, he's incredible. And then he, to get on the end and open the scoring within 3 minutes. And this kind of like gave that aspect of how will Alavés respond to this, and they didn't respond well. Within 15 minutes they were 2-0 down. They were in complete disarray. This was looking like Steven Gerrard had latched onto this chance and driven it under Herrera, and it was a spectacularly taken goal, and it seemed like game over. It seemed like it was over as a contest there and then. But then Alavés made this change, and Dan Eggen was dragged off, and Dan Egan's like a peculiar character, is that he'd been part of a Bromby side that had knocked Liverpool out of the UEFA Cup about 5 years earlier. Liverpool, the first round of the UEFA Cup, Liverpool had gone to Denmark, got a useful goalless draw, took Bromby back to Anfield and then lost 1-0 to a late-ish goal. And Dan Egan had been part of that side. I think he actually scored the goal. So of all the Alavés players, Dan Egan was one of those that stood out on the team sheet as being, something of a danger. So to see him disappear so early, because Alavés changed formation within that, on came Ivan Alonso. But then within 5 minutes of Alonso's introduction, he's got one back. And this kind of like threw a bit of a spanner in the works. But then 5 minutes from half time, Gary McAllister scores from the spot. Excellently taken penalty from a player who propelled Liverpool onto that finish that season. He'd come in from Coventry City in the summer of 2000, one of the most surprising signings that we'd known. A Liverpool player in all circumstances, but a player that we've signed 10 years later than we should have done. But he was incredible, and that run-in, he was spectacular. So for him to be stood there to put this penalty in with 5 minutes of the first half remaining was just the most reassuring thing in the world. And you thought, well, that's it. They've had the hiccup. McAllister scored. Everything's settled. Second half's going to be a doddle now.
We will come back to you for the second half. Don't worry about that. We won't leave you down there. Aidan, I think obviously we looked at the 1987 FA Cup final, and we talked about Clive Allen's early goal and then Coventry's equaliser. And I suppose that old adage of an early goal is always good for a final, but it's like is it just a cliche, or do finals need? I mean, obviously this goes on to epic proportions, and to be fair, the Coventry Tottenham game does a similar sort of thing, just in reduced numbers. But in terms of a final, the quicker the goal is scored, is it usually the better the final is?
Often that way, yeah. It seems to. It can provoke the action, I guess, to some extent, can't it? When things get off to a fiery start. But in this case, it was slightly different to the Coventry one in that fired up the team who'd gone behind. Whereas here, it just seemed to confirm everything that everyone had come into this expecting. And then I guess when it went to 2, it was doubly so. I think it does tend to help, and I don't think it's just a final. I think a game in general can. It can avoid it sinking into a bit of an early lull of feeling each other out and a bit of probing rather than actually going for the jugular. So I guess when it's a final and you really want a showpiece, then it does help. And it certainly lit this game up, not just the opening goal. But as Stephen was saying there, it was almost as if it was two halves within this first half, of up to the point Alavés made their change, and then after it was completely different game of very much one-sided up to that point, and then much more even, I think, following that to some extent anyway. But the reassuring state of McAllister Stephen's talking about there, he'd been booked very early on in that initial flurry of play, a bit of vocal dissent to the referee complaining about a foul on another Liverpool player. So he spent the rest of the match, the whole 110 minutes worth of it, I guess, almost, being on a yellow card in the hub of the game, and yet was still hugely influential. So he was one of those, reassuring is the right word, he was reassuring throughout. But yeah, to go back to your initial point, an early goal very much helps. Quite to this extent is not normal, because it was chaotic, although like I say, much of the second phase of this first half was much more even and sort of, for want of a better word, normal than I recalled from the time. It wasn't helter-skelter type stuff all the time, as much as when the chances came, they seemed to be fairly good chances and fairly open and quite comfortable. When Liverpool's penalty came from a bit of a walkabout situation by the Alavés goalkeeper, getting himself in bother when he didn't need to. Equally, the goal Liverpool conceded was a fairly basic one in terms of a cross in, just headed in. It just wasn't defended. And this might I think one of the themes of the evening was Carragher at left back. He struggled, in my opinion, with the right wingers of Alavés. So there was early signs of that, and I guess it's early signs of defensive frailties all round, in that the chances presenting themselves were either basic ones put away or were clear-cut chances that should never have become clear-cut chances. So the early goal probably did help open it up early on, as it often does. There's nothing for them to wait around for. They had to go for it. So yeah, the early substitution was equally important, I think.
It's funny. I was going to ask you about that, Gary. About the early sub. You know, it's an incredibly 2-0 down in the final after 20 minutes is obviously not an ideal situation, but to almost have the courage of your convictions to make a change that early, it must be so difficult, especially, you know, as we said, in a major European final. You are literally going to live and die by that. You know, it could almost be not a career-ending decision, but they are massive moments in a managerial career. If you're going to change your starting lineup after 22 minutes of a major final.
He absolutely is, and you know, I'm not sure there's many games you see start with 7 centre backs on the pitch at one time, because obviously, you know, Carragher, you know, as Stevie said, was a centre back by trade, and so was Babel, and Alavés were playing with 3 centre backs, almost back 5, which they'd done for most of the season, and Mane, the coach, the Alavés coach, had the bottle to realise. I mean, Liverpool would need 3 up because Heskey, I think it was Heskey, was through on an error as well, and he blocked it. I think he blocked it with his feet, but they were almost 3 down, you know, inside no time at all, and the game was almost over. But you know, he made the decision, and you know, it got the reward. And it's interesting, you know, even though it was I'm talking about 7 centre backs on the pitch, 3 of the goals Liverpool conceded were from headers. But when you think about, you know, they've got 4 defenders who were all by trade centre backs, and the goal scorers, aside from Cruyff was very tall, but you know, the other 2 guys who scored the headers were, you know, we're not particularly big guys, and I guess it was just one of those sort of ridiculously open games. But yes, Mane had the guts to make the decision, and he reaped the rewards because they were back in the game. And the penalty, after they'd come back, it was a bit more of an even game because Liverpool torn to pieces for 20 minutes. It was, you know, how many goals do you want? But the penalty almost sort of blotted their copybook, and Herrera's decision was, you know, as Aidan said, go and walk about. I mean, he tried to foul him 3 times, missed with his left hand arm, missed with his right arm, and eventually tripped him up inside the area. I mean, tried twice to get him outside the area, but I mean, crazy bit of goalkeeping. And you know, I bet, you know, the coach was thinking, what are you doing, you twerp? You know, you got back into the game, get beat at half time 2-1, and it's a different kettle of fish. But 3-1, you think, okay, you know, Alavés have had their little bit of a poke at it now, and Liverpool will assume control. But first, I don't know, 5 minutes of the second period, threw that up in the air.
But I mean, obviously, you know, like we said, there's still so, like you said, such an action-packed first half, early substitutions, 4 goals, a penalty, you know, and we're 45 minutes in, and you know, like you say, we're not even halfway through. Literally, we're not, even though it's the start of the second half, we're not even halfway through the story or the narrative and what's to come. So second half then, Stephen, back to the action.
Yeah, the changes continued at half time. You know, another one made at half time. Magno came on for Astadio, and yeah, it just the boldness of Mane was incredible in this game. To make that tactical change halfway through the first half, and then get to half time in a game that he's chasing at 3-1, where you're probably thinking my best bet here is, or my biggest hope is to take this game into extra time rather than win it from this point in 90 minutes. To make another change at half time is, you know, leaving yourself with very little room for manoeuvre. And yeah, I was just bowled over by his bravery in this respect. He just went for it big time. And yeah, you know, it paid off epically. So within 5 minutes of the start of the second half, you know, it's level, you know, and this leaves Liverpool utterly punch drunk. Moreno is absolutely incredible in those opening minutes. The free kick that goes under the wall, and he just terrifies Liverpool. absolutely terrifies them. And yeah, I can always remember this image of Westerveld just completely and utterly punch drunk as the third goal's gone in. You know, it's almost like when Dasiev is staggering around from Van Basten's goal. You know, to see a goalkeeper in shock, you know that a team is really, really on the ropes. And Liverpool were 5 minutes into the second half. With the score at 3-3, you're suddenly thinking that Alavés are the most likely, you know, team to win this from here. And then Liverpool then make their own changes. Houllier takes off Hencho, and he makes his own alteration there. And this is where this was the fatigue of the FA Cup final on the Saturday starts to kick in. And then at times they played 3 games in 8 days over that run. They'd had UEFA Cups. I remember over Easter they played Leeds United on the Good Friday. They'd lost. They beat Everton in the derby on the Monday night, which was the McAllister winner deep into injury time. They then played Barcelona on the Thursday night. Then they had more league games on the Sunday. It was one game after another after another. It was every 3 or 4 days. And this was a Liverpool that was getting to the point of being kind of like, you know, absolutely dead on the feet, because over the course of those last 10 games, Houllier made very few changes. He was known for his alterations. He was known for his squad rotation. But within that, this last 10 games or so, he stuck to a winning team. As soon as that game was won against Everton, he was reluctant to make changes. Hence, you know, Robbie Fowler, many thought Robbie Fowler would start the 2001 final, and he didn't. But within that 10 minutes into the second half, off goes Hencho, changes are made. It kind of goes 3 at the back. Midway through the first half, Robbie Fowler comes on, and the incredulous moment is when Mane takes off Moreno. It absolutely confounds everyone. Liverpool, as a Liverpool fan, I couldn't believe my luck. The man that had brought them level was removed from the pitch. It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. But it was such a brilliant stroke of luck. And then for Robbie Fowler to score what appeared to be the winning goal, you know, to validate that he should have been on, because Heskey had just looked fatigued throughout. You know, Gary references that miss in the first half that spoke of a player that was feeling it in his legs from too many games of football in a short space of time. But then Fowler gets this kind of like boy's own winner. You know, he's climbed off the bench. He's vindicated. He should have been in from the start, really. He's got the winning goal, you know, and I remember the celebrations at the side of the pitch, Nick Barmby amongst them, who'd been injured for the running. And yeah, it suddenly looked like Liverpool had it all sorted. But then up popped Jordi Cruyff, of all players, an ex-Manchester United player, to make it 4-4 with 2 minutes to go. And another ridiculous turn of the roll of the dice.
It's funny, Aidan, isn't it? I mean, you know, sort of listening to Stephen there and listening to the you know, the substitution of Moreno and sort of carrying on with this. Like I say, that almost the performance of Mane, the Alavés manager, is almost as intoxicating as the game itself. What the thought, you know, to be inside his head must have been, you know, a crazy place to be. And I guess, do you think having gambled, made the changes, been successful, he's almost overconfident, or now starting to overcomplicate the decision making, and almost lost control again by almost not believing his own hype? That sounds awful, but almost now thinking that all the decisions he's making are correct, so I'm going to make another one.
I guess that's the only explanation you can think of. It's hard to fathom what he was thinking in that case, because yes, Moreno turned the game around. He brought them back in such a short spell of time. His free kick was wonderful, wasn't it? I mean, this was an era where teams had started to jump in the wall only a few years before, really. It was a relatively new thing. So then, of course, the natural thing to do then is to shoot under the wall. And that was a fairly new tactic, but it's not that easy to do for something that sounds quite simple. So it was a wonderful free kick, and yeah, Westerveld had no chance at all. But with Mane, with the coach, I recall after the Babel goal at the start, there was a nice little clip of the coach and his assistant on the sidelines, and one of them staring at his watch in disbelief, and the other one's just shaking his head, thinking, "What on earth have we got into here?" So the fact that he made such positive changes, he caused his team through his direct action to get back into the game. You know, other factors too, but you know, he had instigated all of that. To then get himself to a position of being level with 20, 25 minutes to go at that point when he took off Moreno. It's what was he thinking? He wasn't surely thinking about going to win it and making it 4-3 for himself at that stage. Maybe he was trying to consolidate, or maybe he thought there was a different approach needed because of the changes Liverpool were making. It didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense looking at it back now, and clearly hindsight shows it was a little bit of a mistake, even though they did fight back after Fowler's goal. So I'm sure it's something he regretted when he looked back on it all later on. But yeah, I can only imagine it was some sort of trying to consolidate the 3-3, settle things down, having had this manic flurry to get themselves back from 2 goals down. But if you're going to do that, you still wouldn't choose Moreno as the one to take off.
I know this is another question, just from listening to you guys speak, Gary, I'm interested, as I'm always interested in your thoughts, but when you're in a situation like this and you have obviously the pedigree of Liverpool, the tradition, and obviously, Stephen's mentioned it wasn't a time where they were dominating Europe, but certainly in terms of the players they had compared to Alavés, you almost have which situation do you prefer? Do you prefer the sort of the naive, fearless, we're new to it, we'll take it as it comes, or do you prefer to have the experience, the knowledge, if you like, of the situation? Where do you sort of sit? Where's the better place to be?
So I guess in the following, it almost doesn't matter to some extent. For example, we looked at the Tottenham Coventry game, and there's a similar situation there. That Coventry were just convinced it was their time, and Alavés were on a massive rise. They'd gone through the leagues, finished 6th in the Premier Division, which is a bit mental for a side like Alavés to do that. And so they were on a bit of a rise anyway. So I don't know. It's difficult to say. I just go back to the substitution when he took Moreno off. I thought he must have been injured. It's difficult to say. Perhaps he was. I don't know. Otherwise, I don't know why the hell he took him off, because he looked, as Stevie said, he looks absolutely lethal. You could see him score another goal. And when Fowler came on, Fowler did what you could see Moreno doing. Fowler did what Fowler does. You give this guy a chance in the box. This guy, we were talking on a podcast a while ago about Jimmy Greaves. This guy's probably the closest I've seen to Jimmy Greaves. Looks absolutely dead-eye finisher in a penalty box. Never looks like missing. And certainly he gave the team a boost when he replaced Heskey. But it's interesting just hearing Stevie say earlier about Liverpool's progress and the game against Roma and the penalty or a corner. And on 88 minutes, Westerveld made what we call a rash challenge. And as they would with 2 minutes going on, all the Alavés players were up saying it's penalty. And it's one of those where you can say, I've seen them given, especially when the crowd's baying like that. But whether it was or whether it's not, but the players were probably well chuffed afterwards. The referee didn't get the penalty because the cross came in, and there again, although Liverpool had taken on show off by now, they got beat in the air again from a corner, and it's pretty basic header markings all over the place. And Westerveld almost seemed to come to the cross and got blocked off by, I'm not sure if it was Hippier who blocked him off, but and then conceded then, and and you think. This game's got plenty of life in it yet, and even the last 2 minutes, you would have been surprised if there'd been a winning goal, because the game was just crazy by this stage, and Liverpool had taken Owen off as well, and they put a Berger, I think it was, and almost sort of like it was almost a bit like a lockdown, and it wasn't lockdown. It was anything but.
Obviously we're going to come to extra time. Stephen, and obviously this is the period of the golden goal now. Obviously, extra time when you're playing for when you've got 30 minutes to play, it's almost a third tactical element. You know, as a manager, you know, you have 30 minutes to manage your side, manage your players, possibly manage your penalty takers. You know, there's quite a lot of tactical thought. Obviously, I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm by no means a top-level manager, but I would assume there's a lot of tactical thought goes into those final 30 minutes. But obviously, this is the era, the temporary era of the golden goal. Now, how you, as a manager, you legislate for that, it must, I have no idea how you begin to either, you know, like we said, do you go for the goal, do you sit and hold, I don't know. I can't imagine what it must be like. I mean, especially having played in a game that's been so open and 4-4. You know, like you said, the goal could have come from, and you could have kicked off and scored and it'd all be over. Or you can be playing for another 30 minutes and end up needing to take penalties. It must be a manager's nightmare.
Yeah, it was. I think that the beauty of at least the plus side of the golden goal was that there was no age-old, you know, theory on how it should be taken, because it was just there and you just had to get on with it. But it was absolutely terrifying to live through. You know, if you saw your team in a game that pronounced, playing in a kind of like, you know, it's like going down the park and saying next goal wins. You know, it's exactly what it was like. But so much at stake. You know, you're thinking one error, one more Westerveld, you know, flap at a ball and it's all over. You know, and that was the thing. You know, you know, a set piece anywhere around the penalty area, and it could have been Alavés to win that. The thing about that was that I think that Houllier had already he'd set his stall, as if to say, the team that gets them to 90 minutes will be the right team to take them through extra time should it come to it. Because the alterations that were made, the removal of Owen, the removal of Heskey that brought on Smeacher, brought on Berger, put them in the wide positions and gave Liverpool a three-man central midfield of Murphy, of Haman and Gerrard. So Liverpool stretched the game in that respect, just at a time that removal of Moreno started to constrict Alavés. And yes, they got their equaliser, but that one removal of Moreno changed absolutely everything in that game. It changed the whole lot, the whole demographic, because combined to the alterations that Houllier had made, going 3 at the back, 5 in the midfield, and then effectively 2 up front, it just changed the whole scenario. You know, it did. It just altered it all completely. But Liverpool was set up to go into extra time ready for it, whereas Alavés weren't. And then they'd lost their most potent weapon, who could have snatched that winner. But not just that, they went down to 10 men within, you know, 8 minutes into extra time. Off goes Magno. So to lose a player, to see a player sent off, bad enough, but it was the player that came on at half time. So he was one of the freshest players that Alavés had on the pitch. So that was a huge blow to them. And once they lose him, it is just a case of, you know, try and keep Liverpool out, see if they can hit on the break or angle for a set piece. It was a case of containment, and if we can snatch a winner, great. If not, then let's just try and edge this into a penalty shootout. But as extra time wore on, you know, I think it became a case of it was only ever going to be Liverpool that were likely to get a winner. But when they did, it didn't necessarily look like it was going to happen. And as I remember when the winner went in, it was almost like a double check. Everyone I was in a pub watching it, and there was a split second, and it wasn't just me, but everyone. Has it gone in? Is it over? And it was, you know, and yeah, Carmona, who got sent off for the challenge, he was already on a yellow card. It was a rugby tackle. You know, it was a clumsy, silly, tired tackle to make in a position of the pitch that, you know, you were just ridiculous to make it. And yeah, once you concede a free kick there, it's worse than a corner where it's placed, because you can get all sorts of angle on it, all kind of whip on it. And again, Herrera, who was probably as bad as Westerveld was in that game, you know, came for the ball with a weak punch. It flicks off Delphi-Gelli's head and it's into the back of the net. And, you know, it's such a ridiculous game as it was to end with an own goal as well, you know, kind of like suited the scenario. It suited the evening more than anything. But yeah, you could never legislate for golden goal extra time. It was just it was Russian roulette in football in terms.
To be fair, I suppose it probably was the only way it could finish. I guess it was the only thing that was missing. It was the only thing we hadn't had. Obviously this is again another sort of difficult question, but in terms of Stephen's taken us so well through the game. The mistakes that so many times, but where does this sit in the pantheon, if you like, of great finals? Obviously, it's great people like goals and they like excitement. If you looked at it technically and tactically, probably not a great game. If you looked at it in terms of decision making, probably not a great game. Outstanding performances, probably not a great game. But in terms of just sheer enjoyment, where does it sit?
Always got to have room for bonkers in amongst the quality, don't you? So that raises it up through the rankings than it might have otherwise been, because it was pure entertainment, wasn't it? And especially for the neutral. It must have been extra nerve jangling for the Liverpool fans, especially in extra time. I mean, my only vested interest experience of that is with England, of course, in Euro 96, and that was horrendous. So yeah, I can imagine how awful that would have been. But yeah, it probably doesn't rate amongst the very highest of European finals because of the quality, and because I don't know, you don't want to call it slapstick because there was still.
I think that's a fair assessment.
But you get what I mean. It's not quite. It's not quite on the same level as some of the, say, the Istanbul European Cup final of a few years later in terms of what happened there, where you've got a lot of quality, and then one team probably more favoured over the other, but the slight underdog is the one who fights back in grand style and comes through. In this case, it was more bonkers, but hugely entertaining as a result. Given how it started out, when it looked like it was going to be fairly straightforward in terms of the narrative of this, Liverpool off to a comfortable early lead, surely they'll see it out. Even with a slight wobble, as Stephen said, in the first half, and they still end up with a 2-goal advantage. It should have been comfortable. They should have made it easier. They had the quality to do so. It didn't quite work out, partly because of, we talk about poor tactics, and yeah, there were poor tactics on display, but some of the positive changes made on both sides influenced the game deeply, as well as the flawed changes that we've mentioned as well. So, we mentioned how the Alavés manager was brave enough to make the early change and again at half-time, and equally Houlier's change, bringing on Smicer, I thought was hugely influential in settling things down and giving Liverpool a greater edge, or at least moving them a bit further forwards. They were getting a bit stuck back at that time, pinned back by what Alavés were doing. So there were positives from the tactical sense as well, but I think it probably sits a notch or two below the very best European finals, but in terms of sheer madness and bonkers and great entertainment, particularly for the neutral, it is very much up there.
It's obviously, Gary, it's not the same, but there are elements to it that feel the same. And obviously 4 years later, we have Istanbul, and yet they feel like two completely different games. And I'm not a Liverpool fan. I wasn't at either stadium. So looking at it as a neutral, two finals that are producing, let me do the maths, 15 goals, yet they feel completely different games.
Yeah, they do. It's a good point, actually, Stu, yeah. I guess with this one, I think the phrase we should use is not one for the purists. And the golden goal was always an interesting development in football, and there was talk about when they introduced the golden goal that each team would have to take a player off every 10 minutes to reduce the. Well, I think Alavés thought that was going to happen. The Magno sending off was what a ridiculous challenge he put into. Got absolutely no arguments, and there's tiredness and there's stupidity, and I know which category that one fitted into, and the manager must have been sort of pulling it out. And from that stage, you can only see one team scoring, and then obviously in the second period of extra time, The skipper gets sent off. It would have been a terrific, absolute pillar of strength all the way through the domestic season for Alavés. And a slightly different because he was skinned by fresh legs, and as Stevie said, he rugby tackle, but so they decided to take another player off just to try to make it a bit more interesting. And of course, Liverpool scored from that free kick. But I think the game in Istanbul was so different because took a game of two halves. AC Milan lost the first half, and Liverpool at the second half. But this wasn't the case in this game. It was a sort of like Liverpool were leading three times. In fact, because they were 2-0 up, 3-1 up. But in fact, they were leading four times if you count the 5-4 goal as well. And so it just showed the dogged determination of a team that had overperformed, certainly domestically, in the league programme. And that they would sort of had that perhaps never say die attitude as opposed to the inspirational comeback that Gerrard inspired in Istanbul. So I think it was different on so many levels. It wasn't one team cantering away into the distance and then being hauled back. This was a sort of step. But I suppose this game was all, and perhaps as Liverpool fans, Steve might disagree, but this game was probably more entertaining because it was sort of I didn't know what the hell was going to happen next because 9 goals in effect if you count the golden goal, 2 red cards, goalkeeping errors all over the show, plenty of goals. It's just a crazy game. Crazy. As I say, not one for the purists.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of European finals that we can talk about with regards to Liverpool's team, but I suppose this comes in certainly a fallow period in terms of European success, and then obviously we just mentioned there at least 2005. But in the sort of grander scheme of things, for the development of Liverpool Football Club, now we're 19 years sort of down the line, and the league title's finally been secured, but for the development of the future success of Liverpool Football Club in sort of now today, how did that game sort of benefit? Did it benefit? Did it help? What legacy did it leave for Liverpool?
It was the springboard basically for Liverpool to become a European force again, and they did over the course of the next decade. Yes, they won in Istanbul, but there was another Champions League final in 2007. There was a semi-final in 2008. They were under Rafa Benitez. They were always very, very close, and they were at one point they were probably the best Champions League side basically. At one point, they were a fantastic side. In European terms, couldn't put it together domestically to take that title. Didn't come, came very close. 2009, but 2001 was a huge stepping stone into the reinvention of Liverpool almost. Because all of Liverpool's success had come from that boot room tradition and the old currency of English football, of the collective and the beer culture era. Still great football, still wonderful footballers, but it was suddenly a very different kind of football, and Gerard Houllier was a huge stepping stone in that. He doesn't get anywhere near the recognition that he should, and it's something that will come in time. It's like the big banner. There's a huge banner at Anfield that flutters across the Kop, which has kind of like Shankly, Paisley, Fagan, Dalglish, and then it hops past Houllier and goes to Benitez. Klopp will, if he hasn't already been added to that, then he soon will be. But Houllier seems to be skipped, which is an anomaly, really. It went a bit more downhill for him within a year. But you think, 2001, 2002, Liverpool made the quarterfinals of the Champions League. They only went out narrowly to Bayer Leverkusen, which kind of stopped what would have been a Liverpool-Manchester United Champions League semi-final at a time when Liverpool had the sign over Manchester United. Liverpool were getting regular good results against Manchester United at that time. So, that Champions League final could have come 4 years earlier than it did. No one will ever know that now, but this was a Liverpool that used that UEFA Cup stepping stone as a it was like the Apollo missions. It was going around the moon, without landing, basically. That's what it was. It was Apollo 8 or 9 or whichever one it was. So yeah, it was huge in Liverpool, because you got to understand as well as that Stephen Gerrard was in that team, Jamie Carragher was in that team, who translated to the 2005 Champions League final. It was a huge stepping stone for Liverpool. And I'd never undersell or underestimate just how important that was.
It's been, we've done just under an hour, and obviously the game probably goes just as quick. If you're gonna watch 120 minutes of football, it probably goes, just like that in the blink of an eye. Stephen, wonderful match summary, right up there with Aidan's match summary. Obviously,
no pressure, Gary, for the next one.
Yeah, yep. I was going to say there's no real surprise. Who's going to do the third and final summary? What competition is going to be? Yeah, no pressure, Gary. The boys have set the bar quite high, and they've picked. Well, like I say, we've got 9, 5. We've had 14 goals so far from Stephen and Aidan. So you're left with one final. And bear in mind, if you pick a 0-0 or a 1-0, that's an awful lot of talking.
Well, I've got the game sorted, and these are safe hands. The selection is in safe hands. These call mistake when I play in goal. I mean, generally they did use call mistake hands, but it's not a final. But it's a game that's got as much crazy action as the one Stevie's picked. So it'll be massively entertaining to talk about as well.
Excellent. Aidan, as always, thank you very much for joining us, for contributing and fielding the rather difficult questions that have come your way this time.
I would expect nothing less, Stu. It's been great as usual, and it was wonderful getting to watch this game again, because it was bonkers. It was great fun, and yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it as always.
Brilliant. Gary, like we say, no pressure. We're just, we're waiting with bated breath to get the game as it comes through on our phone, to see what it is that we're going to be watching, and just get your best summarisers accent out there. And yeah,
I'm going to get my John Motson sheepskin jacket on, and I'll be sort of summarising. But big up to Stevie. Great selection for this game, mate. Fantastic watching. Went so quickly, and I remembered the game. So fondly, brilliant. As Aidan said, absolutely bonkers football.
Right, and obviously Stephen, as Gary just said there, great selection. Always great to watch a 9-goal thriller, especially when you don't care who wins one way or the other. Excellent summarising, and to condense that 120 minutes into about 40 is not a bad job, to be fair.
Oh, that's what we did. Like I said at the start, it was like a football in Empire Strikes Back. It had its flaws, it had its plots, flaws and all sorts. But what we need at the start of this is a scroll.
Well, if the four of us now all just go and head off and go and rescue Han Solo, we'll all return just in time for Gary's.
As long as Gary doesn't introduce any Ewoks for the last one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We don't need any of that. Guys, thanks ever so much. Gary, we shall look forward to your choice, and we'll reconvene right here for part 3. Thanks very much, and thanks for watching. See you again.
Cheers.
See you guys.